Hey, it's Les from the TV Dudes. This week, I was so lucky to chat with Jose Molina. Recently, he was showrunner for the YouTube series Weird City, but you may know him from Dark Angel or Firefly or Agent Carter or any of the number of projects that he's worked on. We chat a bit about Weird City, what's fun about sci-fi, what we love about genre, and quite a bit of discussion about a Star Trek spec script. Stick around, it's really fun. I know you might be a little constrained on what you can talk about as far as Weird City without spoiling what looks to be an insane season from that trailer.
Yeah.
But when your day is busy right now with Weird City work and all that, what is that like? What was it like getting on board that project, and then what's your role like with it?
Well, I mean, my role now is finished. The show wrapped production in August, and we finished post in October. So it's been wrapped up for a little while. We're just waiting to air now. So I'm already on to the next thing, which I wish I could tell you all about, so that you could tell the whole world about this super exciting thing. But unfortunately, I cannot.
Oh, soon enough, I'm sure.
In terms of how I came to work on the show, it was actually kind of a Hollywood boilerplate story. There wasn't anything super fascinating about it, other than the fact that, out of my 20-year writing career, I have been an hour-long drama guy. And I wound up going on The Tick because Ben Edlund is a friend of mine. We worked together on Firefly and stayed friends after that. And so Ben asked me to come and join the staff of the Tick reboot on Amazon. And the first thing I said to him was, I'm not a comedy writer guy. And he was like, yeah, oh, I know, but I think you're funny. So come and do it. So I went and I did it. And then suddenly I'm getting calls from people who want to do comedy and are approaching me to take a shot at it. And this was just one of those things that came up through my managers. Sent me an email one day, and they were like, YouTube and Sonar are doing this amazing thing with Jordan Peele. And one of his Key and Peele writers, would you be interested in looking at these scripts and taking a meeting? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. I love Key and Peele, I love Jordan, and I read the scripts that Charlie Sanders wrote, and I thought they were great. And I went in and had a meeting, and it was kind of a funny meeting because it was a room full of people. It was Charlie and I want to say 5, maybe 6 executives from Sonar and from YouTube and from Jordan's company, and Charlie Sanders' manager, I believe, was in there. So I was kind of playing to the room as much as possible, as you're supposed to do in those meetings. Mm-hmm. But it felt a little, while I was in the meeting, it felt a little scattershot because I didn't really have the one person to focus on. And Charlie was kind of sitting at the far end of the table. So the meeting goes fine, and I'm basically getting up to leave when Charlie out of nowhere goes, hey, do you play Dungeons and Dragons? And I'm like, yeah, why? And he just goes like, you look like a guy who plays Dungeons and Dragons. And then he lowers his head, and he's wearing a Dungeons and Dragons hat, which I hadn't seen the whole time during the meeting. And then we spent like 10 minutes geeking out about D&D, and I'm convinced that it was those 10 minutes that actually got me the job, when Charlie and I just connected as writers and geeks who just enjoy the same kinds of things. And I came out of that meeting, and it still took a while for the job offer to come, but eventually it did.
Something I wanted to ask you about that you kind of touched on a minute ago. If you're an unemployed artist, managing gaps between your projects just comes down to you staying working and making sure that you don't have a fallow time where you're not doing anything. But as a working writer or working artist, you're beholden to sometimes when projects go and their schedules. How do you keep yourself busy between jobs or try to keep that seamless? Do you have a back burner set of projects you're always fiddling with, or how do you manage that?
I think especially in 2019, where the vast majority of jobs have become short orders, where you're lucky if you're working on a 13-episode show. There's so many that are 6 or 8 or 10. You have to have a back burner of stuff that you're either working on while you're doing the gig, or that you're ready to jump on the minute the gig is up. And some of that is development that you can put a pin in when you go to that job, and hopefully your producers will wait for you. And some of that is your own material that you can be either continuing to write during whatever time you have during a show. But sometimes it's a question of you finish a gig and then your reps will put you up for something. And sometimes that's development that moves at its own pace. Sometimes you can pick up a piece of development and take it right to pitch stage in a month or two, but usually it takes, a few months before that can happen. But, like I was saying earlier, I've been doing this for 20 years now, and I have never hustled harder than what I'm doing now.
When you got your start, 20 years ago, it was a spec script for Star Trek Next Generation, if I remember right.
Yeah, the Star Trek was the thing that got me the internship that brought me to LA in the first place. So I was going to college when I found an advertising, a flyer for the Television Academy summer internship. Television Academy being the guys who hand out the Emmys. And so I applied to that internship, and because I chose the screenwriting category, I had to write a script. And so the script that I wrote was an episode of Next Gen that was about the return of Lore before he actually returned at the end of season 6. And that got me the internship, and that allowed me to come out here with a job and tell my parents that somebody in Hollywood thought I was worth, a couple of $100 a week. But then between that and my first writing gig, it was 7 years of, I worked at Blockbuster Video for a while. I was unemployed for a while. I couldn't get a job at Aaron Brothers streaming store. And I got a PA job at Warner Brothers and a job as a reader at Warner Brothers, and then finally an assistant job with Howard Gordon, who was at the time coming off of The X-Files. And that was the job that helped me make the jump to my first staff writer gig on Dark Angel after having written a couple of specs, and the ones I was using at that time were a Law and Order Mothership spec and an X-Files spec.
Is there something particular about genre and sci-fi that appealed to you? Is it just something you've always been a fan of? I've always enjoyed how I feel like sci-fi can take a stab at social issues that might be a little too on the nose for This Is Us, or might be a little too audiences might not take it quite as well, but like the Lorax can get a different level of environmental story across. Then, is there something particular about genre that kind of draws you to it as a writer?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I have to admit that when I got into genre, I was really too young to understand the nuances of the themes that genre was trying to sneak in. But I always describe science fiction and fantasy and horror as the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine of the message go down. But, I was 6 when Star Wars came out, and I like everybody else my age, was obsessed with Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back and Jedi when it came out. So, and at age 10, I picked up my first D&D set, and that really, those things paved the way for me to just be a genre junkie in every possible aspect of my life. And, it was D&D especially that really got me into reading and writing, because living in Puerto Rico, where I grew up, there were no hobby shops. The D&D box set that I got while I was visiting family in St. Louis. So I went back to Puerto Rico and I played the adventure that was in the starter set. And then that was it. There was no more. I couldn't go to a store and pick up a module. So I just started writing my own adventures for my friends who were my players. And because of the kind of storytelling that I was engrossed in while playing D&D, I gravitated to a lot of fantasy, which, funnily enough, led me to Terry Brooks before it led me to Tolkien. But so I was a very early nerdy kid, and then the older I got, the more I realized that you could really do a lot of different things with genre, and not only try to say things that were deeper than the patina would suggest, but that you could also subgenre a lot of things within sci-fi, horror, fantasy. Terminator, for me, is a movie that was really game-changing, because the thing that really blew my socks off about the Terminator was the love story, and the tragic love story. And seeing a really moving love story in the middle of a huge action-adventure sci-fi story really opened my eyes into the flexibility of the genre that I loved then and is still my favorite.
When you look back in hindsight over things you've written, do themes jump out at you? I've heard you say that you feel like sometimes you get tapped as the sci-fi guy on the staff, but when I think back to Take the Sky or Trash or even your Star Trek script with lore asking to be deactivated, do you find certain themes come up in your writing that you think that's the sweet spot that you feel is true?
I mean, whether I want to or not, faith and religion and the afterlife always seems to pop up. Maybe because I don't really feel like I wrestle with it still. I feel like I'm at a pretty comfortable place with faith and religion, but I grew up going to 12 years of all boys Catholic school, so that's going to leave a mark. You don't come out of that unscathed. And for a long time after that, I was wrestling with it. Through my mid-20s, I was very torn up about how I could balance having faith and being smart and embracing science and fact. So that's probably a theme that comes up most frequently I feel like in my work. Now I'm trying to think of like specific things that you're talking about, like in Trash.
Well, I was thinking like Mal looking back, or Lore having experienced emotions and kind of asking to die, or asking to stop it. Kind of on at least those three, a kind of reflecting back seemed to come up.
Well, I wonder if there's any part of this that's true. I honestly haven't really examined this, but if you look at that Star Trek spec, and I don't know if it's out there anywhere. Have you found it out there anywhere?
No, I had seen someone discussing it. It's just kind of the broad strokes. There might have been, I can't remember who the interview was with. It was you and either a Firefly group or I can't remember offhand.
I wonder if it was Geekscape talking to Jonathan London about it. But what that episode was, in a lot of ways, was Frankenstein. And Frankenstein is one of my favorite books of all time. And, you know, most people look at Frankenstein and they think of it's science run amok, it's science fiction, it's horror. But at the core of Frankenstein is man versus God. And the epigraph, I think is what you call it, of Frankenstein is actually from Percy Shelley poem called Prometheus Unbound. No, I'm lying. It's actually from Paradise Lost. And it's something along the lines of, did I endeavor thee, maker, from your clay to mold me man. So it's basically an existentialist story. In Frankenstein, the monster is facing off his creator and going, why did you do this to me? You have inflicted me with a lifetime of pain. And that's a very common conversation for a young person to have with God when you're going through adolescence and you're going, everything hurts. You asshole. So that's a theme. That's a thing that especially when I was younger really resonated with me, and that's why Frankenstein meant so much to me. But again, you see even in science fiction and literary science fiction, and even in that first spec, even though there's not a direct connection to God, you're still going back to faith quests.
Yeah, I always loved Frankenstein and fundamentally misunderstood it when I was a kid, I think, and didn't get into it until later when I finally went and read the original.
It's so funny because that spec started with a couple of different ideas sort of rolling into one. And one of them was, you know how Data would go into the holodeck and he would do Sherlock Holmes, or they would do Robin Hood in the holodeck or whatever. So one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to do Frankenstein on the holodeck. And that winds up in the script, because Data is, you remember one, I think it was The Defector, where he is supervising a production of Henry V, and he's just like directing it. And the episode starts with Picard and Data watching the play unfold. My episode started very similarly with Picard and Data watching a production of Frankenstein unfold before them. And then that wound up connecting to the science story, which is like there's this they're visiting this alien planet, and there's this unknown life form that's on the planet, and it's a snow planet that's very Hoth-like, and there you get into the Star Wars influence, and the Frankenstein story sort of dovetails with the Frankenstein production dovetails with the endangered species on the planet, and thematically it all connects through lore and the sort of the value of life. Wow, I didn't realize we'd be talking this much about that episode. Sorry, I feel like I've sidetracked us massively.
Well, you yourself now, just writing on Firefly and Dark Angel and so much other stuff, have added to some of that fiction that is out there making genre fans right now. Like there's kids who are going nuts for Firefly the way that we went nuts for Star Wars. Sure. And do you have a favorite particular character that you've written that just ended up being more kind of lovable in the back of your mind over the years than you expected?
Off of Firefly?
Or just off of any show? Do you have even some of the more obscure stuff? Have you had any characters that kind of that voice keeps cropping up? Or anyone you'd love to return to?
Well, I mean, look, Firefly is definitely one that got away, and it's funny when I wound up writing Take the Sky, I actually said no initially to the offer to write that story, word of the request to write that story, because I felt like it had been a lot of years, and in the intervening years, I'd done a fair number of interviews and taken a fair number of jobs, and I felt like it was time to sort of put Firefly in the past. But I happened to be working on Castle when that request came in. So I was talking to Nathan, and in talking to Nathan about Firefly, I sort of started missing the world. And an idea just kind of jumped into my head, which was to recast Mal as Will Money from Unforgiven. And so that came out. So those characters are characters that I would love to pick up at any time. It bums me out that Adam Baldwin has become such a difficult public persona to rally around, because his political views are absolutely repugnant to me. But writing for Jane was definitely one of the great pleasures of my early career. More recently, Agent Carter really filled that hole. Like, I would go back to writing those characters and that show at the drop of a hat.
I think just recently, Seth MacFarlane, talking about the Orville, called it specifically sci-fi with a touch of humor and not a comedy sitcom. Where would you put Weird City on that line, or was that a fair spectrum that y'all were considering when you were going into it?
Yeah, I mean, Weird City definitely lives in the comedy side first and foremost. Charlie's goal, whenever we were trying to figure out what our goal was with a story, was, is it funny? And even, when we got into production and we were wrestling with having to make cuts so that we could afford to shoot it and shoot it in the time that we had allotted, the priority was, is it funny? He was always of the side that he would rather lose plot than joke. So Weird City is without a doubt a comedy first and a sci-fi show second.
As far as all the guest stars, were those known going in, or was that just a absolutely beautiful stroke of casting? The set of actors y'all got is just absolutely wonderful for a show. I can't wait to see them all work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and they were fantastic. I mean, without exception, every one of those guys was an absolute pleasure to work with, from Ed and Dylan in the beginning to Aquafina and Yvette, who wrapped us up with episode 6. No, we did not have anybody in our pocket when we started. We had all of our scripts before we started even pre-production. So we were lucky enough that before we actually started trying to figure out how to make the show, we had all of the scripts that we could start putting feelers out to actors and going, well, do we want to offer a role in this episode to this actor, or do we want to save him or her for somebody else? Like, Yvette was somebody that I think we discussed potentially having her in a couple of different episodes, and ultimately we decided that putting her in that last episode was the best use of her incredible talent. But no, we had nobody, and it got a little scary there at the beginning, because until Ed and Dylan signed up, we didn't know if we threw this party, if people would come. And Jordan, put out his own feelers to a lot of people that he either knew or that he knew he could get through to them because of who he is. And that really made all the difference for us. Thinking back on it, now I can't remember if Ed was the first person to sign on. I think Michael Cera might have actually been the first big name that we got. Michael really loved the role of Tawny in the episode Health Club. And he called, I think he was in New York, and he called and he got on the phone with Charlie and me, and we just talked for nothing, like 10 minutes. And he just wanted in. And we were ridiculously happy to have him. And I think once Michael signed up, then Ed fell into place pretty quickly, and then Dylan pretty quickly after that. That's if memory. It's been a few months now, so memory might be a little flawed on that.
I know you'd mentioned Frankenstein earlier. Is there any writing, anything you're reading, or any shows you're watching recently that have inspired you, kept the fire burning?
I mean, for TV, I am and have been for the last 7 years a ridiculous Game of Thrones fan, and it's very popular these days to shit all over Game of Thrones, but I don't care. For my money, it's one of the best, if not the best TV shows in the history of television. So that is definitely my obsession. I'm in the middle of a binge on The Americans right now, which I'm really digging. Handmaid's Tale is amazing. Again, that's one that it became very fashionable to bash the second season of Handmaids, but I still think it's absolutely genius.
Yeah, the only thing bad I can say about Handmaid's Tale is that it is really difficult to watch. But I have the same trouble with Margaret Atwood books, where I think I finished Mad Adam and didn't read SciFi for about 6 months. It was like, we're doomed. That's probably the best we'll do this badly.
I mean, I wonder. Part of me wonders if if the way they air it, which is just once a week, and you watch 1 hour a week, and then you go away and then you come back, if that's better, or if it would be better to binge it and just get it all out of your system and have like the worst week ever, and then come out of that black hole of despair. But maybe just dipping a toe in the black pit of despair is all we need.
And it weirdly kind of exists in the same space as things like Weird City or Black Mirror. I still feel like deep down Charlie Brooker probably views Black Mirror as a comedy already. But I remember watching Minority Report with the super cool vertical highways and the cars driving up and down, and thinking my first car's magnet would fail and I would fall through 9 Porsches and be sued for the rest of my life. And that's the sci-fi, based on how my phone works, that's the sci-fi future. And so the first time I saw Black Mirror or the trailer for Weird City, I was like, oh yeah, they've got my number. That's how tech would go.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely we talked a lot about Black Mirror, and we talked a lot about Twilight Zone in terms of when we were doing Weird City, and how to get the most bang out of our anthology book. So we always started with a big concept, and a lot of these came through Charlie. Like by the time the writer's room started, 4 of the 6 scripts had already been written. Charlie had initially the show sold to another network, and they commissioned Charlie to keep writing while they were developing the show. So Charlie wrote the first one with Jordan, and then 3 more, and then that network decided that they didn't want the show after all. But these 4 scripts were out there, and so when Charlie and Jordan and their producers went into YouTube to pitch it, YouTube inherited these scripts. So when I came onto the show, these ideas were already there. The scripts were there. So it was up to us to really just do the final 2 episodes. And we just kind of followed Charlie's MO of coming up with a funny, crazy premise, and just but letting that premise be ostensibly a futuristic high concept premise, and then just figure out what's the. I got in trouble for saying dumb before, but in my head it was always like, what is the nth degree silly dumb version that we can do of a Black Mirror episode? So it's just, and I think the reason I got in trouble is because it sounded like I was saying Weird City was dumb, and that's not remotely what I was saying. What I mean is that it's a very smart show about sometimes very dumb things, and you take characters and you put them in futuristic circumstances that then you dial up to the point where they're a little over the top, and that's where your social commentary comes in, is you're doing satire and you're commenting on the absurdity of how crazy we allow things to get sometimes in our world and in our lives.
Yeah, that world designed for Kryptonians, where everybody looks like a scientist doctor, but then actually filling it with the people that would go to Disney World, or just normal folks like, my aunts and uncles and stuff. Is going that gap is going to be a tension that's funny.
Right.
Yeah, I can't wait to give it a look. And I think we're going to be talking about it in the next couple of weeks.
I really hope you like it. I think it's very funny. The cast, I mean, we could not have been luckier across the board. Every single episode has just outstanding performances by people who just came to play. And I think having the show be what it was, where people could take a week out of their schedule and just for 5 days show up to set and just be as crazy and zany and funny, and sometimes out of character as they wanted. Like, we have Stephen Yeun in an episode, and he is the funniest son of a bitch that you have never seen be funny before.
Oh, that's always great to discover.
Yeah. He and Malcolm Barrett, who has been funny before, but Malcolm is mostly known for a lot of serious stuff. Again, insanely funny, and they're both in the same episode, along with Hannah Simone and Gillian Jacob, and that ended up being one of my favorites. That one was directed by none other than Amy Heckerling, so that we got that going for us.
Yeah, I can't believe the pedigree the show has, and Malcolm was just absolutely fantastic on Better Off Ted.
Yeah.
Just a show I wish had just gone forever. So yeah, as soon as I saw him in the trailer, I was like, yes, awesome. On my list of actors, I'm always happy to see working. Yeah,
no, he was great. I should be so lucky as to work with some of these folks again later on in my career.
Well, I can't wait to watch it, and hopefully sometime soon we can talk about the project that you've got going now.
Sounds good.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Bob. Bye.
The TV Dudes is an independently run podcast and a member of the Electric Sweater Podcast Network. We are exclusively listener-supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/tvdudes. You can like us on Facebook and Twitter @TVDudes. All the music for our show is by our friend and original TV dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith. To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com and electricsweater.com. I'm Grant Davis. Thanks for listening.